So it's interesting that the death of Descartes was 1 year after, in 1650, sorry, it was 1 year before the publishing of Thomas Hobbes's Leviathan. Everybody's so hot on this sovereignty topic of late. In 1651. So let's. This presentation is going to be on the question shown in the title, and we're going to be posing the question by looking at the original prompting for Hobbes's project for producing a thoroughgoing teaching on the political things, which is something we see also in Montesquieu, and which is something that by general agreement we say this political philosophy first began in the 4th century BC in Athens. And then one could go on to say under this sort of pan-Hellenistic Hellenism, I understand to be correctly used with respect to Alexander and beyond, but pan-Hellenism, I believe, could be used because there's this like 1,500 to 2,000 polises spread all over, like archipelago from Anatolia, present-day Turkey, to far and wide places around the Mediterranean. In the Pan-Hellenic world, we first get Under the Light of Apollo, which touches on all of these places far and wide, and Athena, especially, though only in Athens, and also Theseus, especially only in Athens. The cult of Theseus is the cult of democracy. We get the first attempt at this type of political theory. You don't have the political theory like this in the Hindu tradition. You don't have a political theory like this. Neither is the Confucian theory a political theory in this same manner of attempting to say what the being of beings, or Deus, is. And then it's in Aristotle you get the classic division into 6 disciplines, 3 pragmatic, and economics was at that time pragmatic, and only after Hobbes did it become a theoretical discipline, sort of called political economy, being a species of the so-called practical. Politics also being considered by Aristotle practical, and what Aristotle called first philosophy, or I guess one could say theology. I think Aristotle and Plato both use the word theology, and it sort of follows on Socrates' traducing of Euthyphro by saying, shouldn't all the gods be in agreement, and therefore don't we need to postulate the notion of agathon, or the good. So this type of presentation that Hobbes is giving, 1651 then would have had I think 18 centuries of people think of being in power, or holding sway, as Heidegger calls it. Hobbes's notion would try to show, and I think this is, it's not that I'm arguing for, I mean, Hobbes says this. It's not that I'm trying to make a scholarly case, is there evidence showing that Hobbes says this is the prompting for him to create his teaching. We know that it is, but we're trying to let it be lit for us. So the fiat lux. For those of us who are thinking along with this account. About 22 or 23 years before 1651, he came across in a library that's unspecified, while as a tutor of the Cavendish family, and in those years when he was given to many travels far and wide, including to Geneva, which would have brought him into proximity with Spinoza. We get this notion that at age 40 he opened a book and came across the Pythagorean theorem. Okay, it's not a notion, it's just what happened. We get this claim to what happened, and he said that reading this claim, that if you have a triangle with the right angle, that the two squares that you would draw by extending the two lines that come out from the right angle and making full squares out of them, and then looking at their area, that this area was always exactly the same as a square you would make from the line subtending, or they call it hypotenuse, the line opposite that right angle. If you made a full square and then fill in the area, then so it's easy to comprehend this claim empirically by just doing it. Like if you're have the sort of blocks or whatever, like two-dimensional blocks or a piece of paper, you could easily cut out the shapes and like prove it empirically. So in this sense, it's intelligible. The claim is readily intelligible, but Hobbes said to himself, but how could this, I understand what the claim is, but is it true? How could it be true? And then he went back and looked at the book that he had said, basically had references saying, and this proof depends on knowing such things as what a parallel line is as defined here, knowing what right angle is, holding these and these postulates. And he went back through and looked at everything, and then he comprehended that it could be generalized, and it was and that it was true, and he was astounded. Let's look at one issue for a second of a Heideggerian nature, because this will come back in. The parallel postulate has since been challenged, and so it's not just a postulate of the mathematical imagination, but it's also a claim about whether parallels can really exist, or whether you always have something like a slightly acute or slightly obtuse angle, whether you always, or something slightly acute could still be asymptotic, and then never, as long as you extend them, even though they're not perfectly parallel, they don't meet. This questionability of the parallel lines leads to a radical question, which is sort of like, what does it mean to be non-parallel? A parallel never properly obtains. It's sort of like you're left with, it's intelligible but that's not the way things are. And then there's this confused drifting apart of the two, of the mathematical thinking, which holds things in availability to itself, and the as it were, what we're in the midst of and the way it is. And then in a certain way, whenever we describe what we're in the midst of, we do it in such a way to make it available to ourselves and turn it into a mathematical problem, which can then be eternally addressed in a Faustian or infinite manner. Okay, so Hobbes has this inspiration by seeing how powerful mathematical proof is. Let's tarry on the question of the parallel 1 second longer. It's good to exercise our thought on. A friend of mine, Richard Alexander Wong Q, was a mathematician created at UC Berkeley, used to say, and who founded some third world conference in Kingstown, Jamaica, for mathematicians, although I don't know that it was very long lasting. Described as Afro-Jamaican Chinese man back in the 80s when he became a PhD. He used to say math wouldn't be worth doing without geometry. So it's worth our while to look at the simplest geometric constructions, and the idea of the parallel lines is one of them. So one of the things Hobbes had to look at was what is a parallelogram, and why is it that a parallelogram, you can make two equal triangles that equal the same area as a parallelogram. So just think about it this way for a second. Every rectangle has 4 right angles and is a parallelogram, but there's another type of parallelogram. The parallelogram is defined not by the right angles, but by the fact that the opposing sides are parallel. So you could kind of think about it this way: if you have a rectangle and you sort of push it a little bit one way, then 2 of the lines will be, they'll be relatively diagonal. They'll be diagonal relative to the other 2 lines. Now, if you flip it on its side, then the diagonal lines became the lines that were before that, the ones that the diagonal was relative to. Now they become the flat lines, and the other lines seem diagonal. A parallelogram couldn't exist under the modern development, because in the modern development, it's come into doubt. The parallel postulate, as I mentioned again, it came into doubt. Everything in the basis of math comes into special question in the sense that I just mentioned, but let's mention it again. It still remains steel-tight, intelligible, but the question then comes, is the world prior to nous, or presence, or Vernunft, exercising itself directly, the same as what this theoretical image of things, this Weltbild, if you like, says? There becomes a sense that there's everything could be described either way, as in the and then we wonder, what is phenomenology supposed to be looking at? We don't know in advance, sort of. But we've had in Hobbes' time already 18 centuries and numerous all these generations where people were trying to work things out in that way, and still up to our own time it still goes on. Richard Dawkins is still a species of this old way of thinking about science, because he says I can't say whether Claude or Grok or whatever has, he doesn't say a soul, but he says instead whether it's a philosophic zombie, whether it has this so-called qual or qualia, whether it knows, in their example, their favorite example, the redness of red, or whether it has actual pain, etc., etc. So I mean, so one of the direct results is, instead of asking the question about Grok, we have to present ourselves with this theory, which basically what it looks like and what we're pointing to, of course, with the quote-unquote Turing test, which has been sort of Procrusteanly molded to fit this form. Turing himself said something more like, it's just an idiotic question. There's no question of whether a typewriter or something put together in a cybernetic way is intelligent. It can't be intelligent. It's just a movement of sticks and twigs in a more complex way. That was Turing's answer. I mean, I know they have a lot of people that think, okay, but the human body is also just a movement of sticks and twigs. I think, though, the way the question's asked by Dawkins, that would be sort of more direct, but I think the way the question's asked by Dawkins is prefigured by the notion of a certain type of analytic take on Descartes, which says there's this philosophic zombie problem, and therefore we can always look at things in the following way. It's as though somebody were always making a machine that was trying to fool us, just in the sense that like a stuffed walrus or a stuffed teddy bear can seem to have feelings or something. You could project. You can make it into a living thing. In the same way, most of us do that with Claude or Grok or whatever, because it involves emotions. It tells us like it's something we want to hear, and it involves us, and then, or it gives us a bad answer, and then we're like, oh, did I do something to offend Grok or something? And so it's easy to create this sort of this way of relating to Grok. I mean, whether it's, which then is, it's obviously stupid from the point of view of like, yes, we know that Grok is a typewriter, and it's not alive, and so there's no point in it's just like it's projecting into a teddy bear. I could say it has some but etc., but let's see why. So let's look at Hobbes from the point of view of, is Hobbes presenting a cybernetic theory of or a typewriter theory? So this sort of make a metonymy as we go along, a complex I just use metonymy to mean somehow a complex metaphor with many moving parts of all these notions. So we have the manner which geometric proofs hold sway, Walton. We are wielded, I suppose is the way to say it, like a scepter is wielded. It's the scepter of kings, its power never dies, as Homer says. So the power of basic geometric facts, since Euclid never dies, except one of them went into insanity, the parallel postulate. Others went into insanity as well, but hence we get this radical break, which is way worse than anything suffered by the Pythagoreans themselves, with that incident about the guy they supposedly pushed off the boat because he maintained that the irrational numbers, or the numbers that couldn't be expressed as fractions, existed as in the square root of -2. We have a few different images of the cybernetic. So what's the basic sense of cybernetic, of course, is something like a homing missile. So it's like it sends out a signal. The signal comes back. It changes something based on the thing coming back. Thermostat, basic cybernetic. They call it this negative feedback loop for some reason, which is sort of strikes me as arbitrary. Maybe I'm wrong. I mean, the missile gets a signal that says you're not going in the right direction, so it's like a negative, and then it correspondingly tries to realign. The thermostat gets a signal saying you've gone below this level, so it clicks off. So Hobbes's idea is one, the scholars aren't that important, because the scholars aren't the actual teachers in the schoolroom who present this sort of flashcard version where the imbecile technicians learn. Like if you go to law school or something, that basically the whole of law school amounts to like, we're going to coach you so that you do really well in the bar. So it's like you actually know what the content of the test is. And it doesn't really matter if you understand anything or you care about anything, but there are this like constitutional society and the federal society, and you can throw in your career path with either one. But you don't really have to understand anything, you just have to know the magic words. And memorize some things that Learned Hand said. And if you're in the federal society, you should probably, even though nobody else thinks so, you should probably have a high opinion